I'm excited about our new series for several reasons. One is really kind of a continuation of our In the Beginning series. We skipped a chapter, and now we're going to look at the story of Noah. But let me tell you kind of what's going on as we begin this new series on Noah. First off, Adam and Eve and Cain and Seth and the siblings of that age have all passed away in life. What's going on in the world? They are dead. And so now we're in second, third, and fourth, and fifth generations of people that are alive. And this is where we're going to look at. This chapter 5 of Genesis basically covers a little bit of that and tells what's going on there. So we're going to pick up at the very end of chapter 5 and look at the story of Noah. We're going to begin today, and then next 2 weeks we'll continue that as well. So are you ready for this? Let's go back to Genesis chapter 5, verses 28 through 30, and then we'll move down into a little bit into chapter 6. Verse 28, when Lamech was 182 years old, he became the father of a son and named him Noah, saying, "This one will relieve us from our hard work, from the pain of our hands, because of the fertile land the Lord cursed." After Noah's birth, Lamech lived 595 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Now, the word Noah means rest, so they named their son Rest. But I tell you that it must have been the dad that named the son and not the mom. You know why I know that? Because any 182-year-old woman who has a child doesn't think that raising that child for the next 20 years is going to be rest, okay? It's just not going to happen. So, when we look at Noah, there's going to be a break in the normal activity, and that's what God is proclaiming as they name this young man or this baby Noah. So, that's who Noah is. Now let's go in to look at who God is, because now we're going to skip the first 4 verses, and anybody wants to read through those and come and discuss the first 4 verses with me in my office, I'd be thrilled to do that with you. It talks about the sons of God marrying the daughters of human, and yeah, I don't know. So we're just going to leave that alone for today. We're going to skip down to verse 5, okay? Here we go, verse 5. The Lord saw that humanity had become thoroughly evil on the earth, and that every idea their minds thought up was always completely evil. Now think about how that says that. The Lord regretted making human beings on the earth, and he was heartbroken. So the Lord said, "I will wipe off of the land the human race that I've created, from human beings to livestock to the crawling things to the birds in the sky, because I regret I ever made them." Wow. Think about the Creator God regretting that he made you. Now the reason is because they were their thoughts. It says every idea their minds thought up was always completely, think about those 2 words together, always completely evil. So life is not very good. So there's a heartbroken creator here. Here is God himself, who his heart is broken because of the evil that's in the world and what's happening with his creation, what his creation has done. But let's look at the next one. But it goes next, it says, "But as for Noah, as for rest, the Lord approved of him." Or as I believe the King James says, Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Now I want to do something that some of you, this is for all of you that are at least 50 and over, okay? Most of everything we do is for 30 and down. But we're going to do this for 50 and older, okay? There was a thing that was going through country and Christian music, kind of like this. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. You remember that? Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord, and he landed high and dry. You ever heard of the Statler brothers? Yeah? No? Okay, a couple of you. So this is one of their songs, okay? So I'm going to have you participate with me, and I'm kind of in the dark here. We don't even know I'm here. So we have Statler brothers, so ready? So you're going to be a Statler brothers. It's Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. The second line gets hard. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. And the hardest line is the third line, Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. And then we know what happened. He landed high and dry. You ready? You're going to join me. Ready? Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord, and he landed high. Now listen to this part. Well, the Lord looked down from his window in the sky. He said, I created man, but I don't remember why. Nothing but fighting since creation days, so I'll send a little water and I'll wash them all away. The Lord come down to look around a spell, and there was Mr. Noah behaving mighty well. And that is the reason the scriptures record that Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Sing it. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord, and he landed high and dry. Now, there are more verses of that song, but that's all we're going to cover today, okay? So, next week we'll do another verse, and I think there are 2 more verses after that. Now, Chad's preaching the last week of this, and I really hope we get on the video his rendition of the last 2 verses of Noah found grace. I really want to be able to catch that. Your wife will help you. No. I just thought that was fun. Thank you. Thank you for putting up with that. But as for Noah, the Lord approved of him. He found grace in the eyes of God. These are Noah's descendants. Now it goes immediately to talk about Noah's descendants. In his generation, Noah was a moral and exemplary man. He walked with God. That's a good epitaph, right? Noah was a moral and exemplary man. He walked with God. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So we find that Noah was righteous. Now we'll find out, as we go through the Noah story, you'll find out that Noah wasn't perfect, but Noah was righteous. And God looked upon the things that Noah did right and blessed that. Okay, but the rest of the earth, let's go on with verse 11. In God's sight, the earth had become corrupt and was filled with violence. God saw that the earth was corrupt because all the creatures behaved corruptly on the earth. And God said to Noah, the end has come for all creatures, since they have filled the earth with violence. I am now about to destroy them along with the earth. So apparently there's something that God doesn't like, and apparently that's violence and corruption. You kind of get that here as well? Corruption and violence are the things that God doesn't care for. But let's go on, because God starts immediately when he talks about that there are issues here and there are problems. He immediately goes on, start making a blueprint for rescue. Verse 14 says, so, he says to Noah, so make a wooden ark, make the ark with nesting places and cover it inside and out with tar. This is how you should make it. 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. Make a roof for the ark, and complete it 1 foot from the top. Now, catch this. Okay, the walls go up to a certain height, and then they have 1 foot of space, and then there's a roof. So the roof, the space there, I'm assuming, is for ventilation, right? All the heat from animals and the smell from animals, so it gets a way to get out, right? Okay, now make a roof of the ark, complete it 1 foot from the top. Put a door in its side, and in the hold below, make the second and third decks. So immediately when we have God declaring judgment because of violence and corruption, immediately God begins to start preparing salvation. Immediately God makes this blueprint for the ark. But then he says, in verse 17 says, I am now bringing the floodwaters over the earth to destroy everything under the sky that breathes. Everything on earth is about to take its last breath. Wow. It kind of gets serious now, doesn't it? We have something good happening, but here's another issue. But let's look at what God then decides how he's going to take care of humanity through Noah. Verse 18, but I will set up my covenant with you. You will go into the ark together with your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives. From all living things, from all creatures, you are to bring a pair, male and female, into the ark with you to keep them alive. From every kind of bird, from each kind of livestock, and from each kind of everything that crawls on the ground, a pair from each will go with you to stay alive. Take some from every kind of food and stow it as food for you and for the animals. And so immediately as well, not only does God give them the blueprint for the ark or the salvation method, but he automatically, instantaneously makes with Noah, with humanity, a covenant. So God's a covenant that he's going to take care of. He's going to continue humanity, even though there's violence and corruption, which just really tears God to pieces. He's making a covenant with humanity anyway. But I like this last verse that we're going to look at today that says, Noah did everything exactly as God commanded him. An obedient person, and he's counted as righteous or as faithful to God. So, humanity, leading up to Noah's time, basically has followed their ancestry, right? We have Adam and Eve in the garden. We just studied that recently. Adam and Eve in the garden, they have everything that is wonderful around them. It could not be any better. It's perfection reached, and they mess it up with sin because of pride and their own wants. They mess it up, and so often that's called, for a lot of theologians, that's called the fall of humanity. And so in that, then we have what's often called the original sin, or something we're all born into. We all have a sin nature, and so we have this thing where we sin. So that's happening. So then Cain follows suit with sin. He kills his brother Abel. He's sent off by himself. And then we have Seth, who was born, basically, Scripture basically says to replace Abel, to replace his bloodline. We don't know how many other children Adam and Eve had, but we know that Seth was there basically to replace Abel's life. And so we have his children that are going in, and Noah is one of those. But then we have the sons of God, or the what I think is the men that are of Seth's lineage, and we have the daughters of human women, and they, in the first part of this chapter, and they start marrying, and so Cain left God, and so what happens is we have all this, the marriage between people who have been raised in faith and people who have been raised godlessly, and they're grumming together, and it seems like the godless people are winning out over those that have faith, and so it seems like the good people kind of lose out as they go, and so now the world is becoming more and more corrupt. And so this is kind of where it's at, that it's fallen again. And so here's the third time in just the first 5 chapters or 6 chapters of the Bible where people have fallen. And so this is, we often call ourselves that we are the fallen humanity. And so as fallen people, or as people who have sin in our lives, we find balance difficult. Okay, we find it, and I'm not talking about standing up straight. I'm talking about, some of us totally reject that there will be consequences for rebellion against God, especially eternal consequences for rebellion against devil or against God, because it's just not a loving God that wouldn't do that, right? And then we have others who think that we know people who really deserve a lot, and those people kind of decide that they're getting what they deserve, and we kind of, for them, when they're going to get their just due because they've treated other people so badly. And so, in our lives, from Noah's time to now, we have trouble with this finding the right balance. And so maybe it's good for us to remember what Paul writes. Paul writes in the Romans, to the Roman people in chapter 11, that he says that God's kind, but he says God's kindness does not exclude judgment. Think about that. So we have a gracious, merciful, loving God, but because he's gracious, loving, merciful, just because he's that doesn't mean he doesn't judge. It's hard for us to understand because we don't do that balance good. We don't do that well. Some of us are just all mercy, all love, and everything. And some of us just can see judgment, And so what happens with God, though, and what Paul's talking about, he says that God doesn't, in God, that the severity is not excluded. In other words, the judgment will happen, but he says that God is a good mix of the two. So God is neither harmless, which would be the all mercy and no judgment, nor is he the harsh, which would be all judgment without mercy. And so that's where we kind of have a tendency to go to as humanity. But Paul is really saying in Romans 11 that God is not either of those, that he doesn't exclude one for the other, but God has a good balance between goodness and mercy and judgment. So Burress, one of the theologians from recent history that I like to read, he actually put it this way. He says, God has powerful ways to bring the world to his vision of unity and harmony and order. I would say flooding the earth is pretty powerful, right? And then think about the other ways that God has done that. He even was powerful enough and interested enough in humanity that he gave his own son to bring some unity and order. But Burress also said this. He said, God is not angered. And he's talking about this Noah story. He said, God's not angered. God's not got enraged. But what God is grieved. And God is saddened. And Burress goes on, he says that God does not stand against his creation like this, but God stands with his creation. And even though 99% or however you want to say it, of the world has turned their backs totally on God, God finds a way to save humanity. So these two truths of kindness and judgment or severity, if you will, they take place in Noah's day. People want help, they want hope, they want a home. But they also want to escape hell and the judgment that's due to sin, and so we want to see that side of God, but then we see this, the Bible calls the destruction of the world by water, calls it a sign that there's going to be something greater than that coming up. And so how do we deal with that? If you get online and Google Noah's Ark or the Noah story, you'll be surprised at how many people will write on there how they don't believe in God or don't believe in the God of the Bible because no God of love would do away with all these people. It's like they're innocent people that just got washed away. And so we have problems with this. But Peter, he talks about the coming of Christ, and he talks about how these events reveal, like Noah, reveal both the kindness and the severity of who God is and what happens when you have mercy and judgment. You see, without even thinking about what was going to happen forever, the people of Noah's day were just concerned about what was going on today. How does it feel today? What do I want today? What is my desire now? And so this was driving their thought process, apparently. And so they were captive, really, if you will, to their own selfish desires. So what looked good in that moment was all they cared about, apparently. Now, when our kids were small, there would be times that we would go to the mall, and when you go walk around the mall, do you remember, I don't know if they still do or not, I don't go to the mall much, but they had a store that had cookies. You remember when the malls had the cookie store and they would have these cookies and you would go and you walk by there and it smelled wonderful. And so, if we were going and, the kids were always going to want a cookie. We knew that. And so if we were going to walk by close enough that they could smell them, we knew we were going to have to stop. And so I would coach them before we went to the cookie store before we walked close enough for them to smell, I would say, chocolate is good. We love chocolate. The Burresses love chocolate. Chocolate chips, the big chocolate chunks are even better. The more chocolate, the better. God made chocolate and said it was good, you know? And we'd go by the cookie store, and the kids would go and they would look, press their faces up against the glass, and they would look at these, and they were just little. And almost every single time, that stale sugar cookie that had Crisco and powdered sugar mixed up with some bright food coloring of some sort, and then some sprinkles, splattered on the top. And that's what I had to finish off for the kids. Now, they've outgrown this, like the silly example of the lust of the eyes. My kids do love chocolate finally, But here's the thing about us as humanity. We never outgrow the temptation to decide what we want to do based on what feels good to us right now and what I think I want right now. This is a very real, this is a very practical battlefield where our souls argue between love for God and love for the world. And we want to make sure who wins, Noah reminds us, that the story of Noah reminds us that the world is under judgment, that it will be wiped out. But so there's this thing going back and forth. So I think the story of Noah tells us, as we start the beginning of this story, is that people can be and will be judged. Now, many people think that God is at fault because his judgment's too harsh. We want to make sure that doesn't happen to us, because I'm not sure how many of us would consider ourselves to be among the 8 most righteous people in the world alive today. But, if we weren't in the top 8, or even the top 8%, I don't know where we'd be. Maybe we'd be in the flood part. But, so we kind of want to think that maybe God's unfair, that God's going on. But here's what really this story tells us is God's not fair. Moses, in this story that he's writing, as he's going through the writing of Genesis, he's telling us that God's not unfair, that it was not a bad day or an occasional indiscretion that caused God to be grieved or saddened. That wasn't what was happening. God looks at the heart, and he finds that the heart of the people in Noah's day, the thoughts were twisted toward continuous and complete evil. Any word they heard just gave them a off-color thought. You couldn't say anything without people taking it wrong or making it a bad thing. It might not have been that every act was outright evil, but their hearts were bent that way, and that was where they were going. And then, shockingly, the Bible claims that ours is no different than theirs. Now, think about that. Took a quick step here. Shockingly, the Bible tells us that our hearts are no different than the hearts of the people in Noah's day. When you go to Romans chapter 3, you get down to verses 10 and 11, and after Paul asks this rhetorical question, are we better than they are? Then he comes back and he says, no, there's no one that's righteous. No one in themselves can stand on their own, not one. There's no one who understands, no one who seeks God on their own. God has to initiate that. He says, then we've all turned away from God. We've all turned aside. And together we've become worth not much in the kingdom of God, because no one does good. And he ends it with this, not even one. Through the years that I've been pastor different churches, I've had the opportunity to have some great conversations with a lot of different people of different faiths. And a few of those times I've had the opportunity to visit with some people who were atheists, who said that they were atheists, and they just want to flat out deny that God exists. And in every situation where I've had a discussion, when I explain to them that the Bible says that their problem is that they hate God and they don't want to see God and they're rebelling against God, they get deeply offended. And why would someone who denies that God even exists get angry at the thought that somebody thinks God's mad at them, if they're saying it's a fairy tale anyway, right? But they get deeply offended. I think it's because our consciences convict us of what is right and what we're not doing right, or what we're doing that's not right. And God guides us through our consciences. Talked about that in the last couple of weeks. And then when God judges the world with a flood, He reminds us that we've all sinned and that we all fall short of the glory of God. So, unfortunately, I think a lot of times when we ask the questions around Noah's flood and all those things, I think we miss the point sometimes because we ask, seem to ask the wrong questions. People wonder if we can hurt God, or if God needs to repent. And those lines are in there, and we look at that, and is God really in control of all things? If evil is in the world and God is not evil, and But this is not intended, I don't think, the story as a systematic explanation of God's nature. I think God simply is telling us in human terms that there's sin, what the greatness of sin is, and the reason that sin is so terrible. See, God is no disinterested force to whom it matters not what we think. God is grieved by wickedness. When you do something at the expense of somebody else to benefit yourself and to hurt somebody else, that grieves God. It's not just that person that's grieved, and if they don't know about it, you're okay. That's not the case. See, God knows, and God hates how it dishonors His holiness. See, all sin is an attack on God's character. Sin is separation from God. And additionally, God cares for His people, and our sin hurts us. That's the reason it's sin, usually. Sin hurts us, and God hurts when we hurt. So it's not just God looking down and say, oh, they'll get over it. No, God, because you're hurt, God hurts as well. God grieves as a loving parent does, I think, when their children rebel against everything that is good. If you're old enough to have some grown children, at some point in your life, I'm sure you've known one of your children or close kin that a child has just kind of, at least for a period of time, just taken off and gone totally away from everything that's good and holy and godly, and it seems like it just almost takes your life. It feels like it's hard, and that's how God feels when we do that. Just one more thing I want to say. I'll quit. Sometimes people wonder if Noah was perfect. And let me tell you, the answer is an emphatic no. Read this as we go through this series. I'm going to let Chad handle that part. I'm going to mess us all up. I'm going to get us all indoctrinated and let Chad clean it up as we go. He's got the last one. We'll look and we'll find out that Noah is not perfect. Chad's not perfect either. Okay. Your wife said you were. I'm sorry. Sometimes people wonder if Noah was perfect. Wasn't he saved because he was blameless? The truth is, Noah was a sinner too. Noah needed mercy. He needed grace just as sure as we do. Maybe the difference was that he chose to be obedient to God. Matter of fact, the last verse that we read, and Noah was obedient to do everything God said. Did you catch that? And then he and his family were on the ark, and God placed this sovereign, undeserved favor on them. And Noah followed God's word, and God gave Noah favor. Let me tell you, that's God's desire for you and me as well. God's desire for you and me is that we will be obedient, and then God will be able to give us and put on us his favor. See, God continually wants to show his favor. That's what goodness does. That's what being good is. Continually wants to show his favor. And then we choose whether we want to step inside of that and be obedient, or step outside and do things our own way. Would you pray with me?